the rights that Americans, had 150 years ago are not the same as they are now, right? When a new issue comes up, you can challenge things through the court process, and eventually the Supreme Court could, grant additional rights to us.
Sorry, Adam, I need another second here just to.
I'll just keep talking about it.
Yeah,
that works. So we're going to jump into a couple key constitutional amendments, right? First Amendment. The First Amendment states Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So under the First Amendment, right, there's freedom of religion. The text of the First Amendment, it prevents the government from establishing a national religion. So the government can't tomorrow say this is Christianity is the official religion. Islam is the official religion of the United States. The First Amendment explicitly prohibits that. At the same time, though, the First Amendment guarantees our rights to practice our religion freely, as long as it doesn't conflict with other laws. So, the government has to maintain a neutral position when it comes to supporting or not supporting religions, but at the same time, the government has to take measures to ensure that you are able to practice your religion freely. Now, something generally with this is that, the text says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment. So the First Amendment, there needs to be a government actor involved for the First Amendment and for our constitutional protections to apply generally. So here at Penn State, right, this is a public college, so Penn State has to take more measures to ensure that, Penn State has to take more measures to ensure that the students are able to express, their freedom of religion and their freedom of speech. A private college, there is no inherent constitutional right to free speech. A private college, the rights that you get are guaranteed through the handbook of the university itself. It's basically a matter of contract law. So I think when it comes to protesting right now, students at public universities are better situated to be able to protest, because government really has to walk a fine line between limiting protests for whatever reason, time, place, and manner restrictions. They can do that. They can require permits, but they can't stop you protesting based off of the content of what you're protesting for. At a private college, they can do that, and we are seeing that happen. At public colleges, universities are cracking down on the protest movement, but they have to walk a finer line. So just throwing that out there. Now, with freedom of speech, you have the right to express yourself freely, whether through speech, writing, or other forms of expression. Social media, you can go out on the sidewalk and scream. But you also have the right to criticize the government. And the government can't just stop your speech because you're criticizing the government and they don't like that. So generally, First Amendment, it's very applicable right now. We're going to kind of talk about how it's being applied with international students. I think on its face, it seems like freedom of speech is not being afforded to international students, and I would agree with that. Now, I do just want to say a side note. I know Ahmet earlier said in the activist scene, there is some skepticism about these types of presentations, but there's still, even though ICE is doing what they want to do and the government's doing what they want to do, fighting through the courts is like the only recourse that we might have going forward. So, recently there was a temporary restraining order. So by having these Know Your Rights presentations, at least you will have the information to be able to respond when something happens. At least you'll be able to know who to call immediately or who your friends can call right away if something does happen. Because when someone is detained by ICE right now, there's only a matter of a couple a couple hours, if that, until they're being transported somewhere. So, under the First Amendment, a lot of stuff is not how we think it should be, but we're going to be challenging those in the courts. And after a little bit, we see how the courts are interpreting things. But so now we'll move on to the Fourth Amendment, right? The Fourth Amendment says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. And no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So what's that do? That protects you from unreasonable searches from the government. The government wants to come into your house, they need a warrant signed by a judge, or they need your consent. If you don't give them your consent, they need a warrant to force their way into your house, unless there's a crime going on in that moment. To search your house, they need a valid search warrant. Or, and the last thing is a belief rising to the level of probable cause. If they're seeing a crime happen, they can interact in that moment. But the Fourth Amendment, protects us in stop and frisk situations, right? The police are able to temporarily stop and ask questions, related to a specific instance, or they're looking for somebody. And you do have to identify yourself to law enforcement, but they can't just stop you randomly. They can't just stop you based off of your race, religion, ethnicity. So over the years, right, that gets hashed out through the court system, where the court will add more rights, for individuals, and police will try to push those rights, and you keep battling it out through the court system. So with stop and frisk, some things that the police do are unconstitutional. Oh, sorry.
I just have a question about the warrants.
Yes.
Does there need to be probable cause for a warrant to be released? Like what leads to someone to a warrant being valid?
So that's what law enforcement will have to have articulable facts that they submit to the judge, that a reasonable person would say, either that this person committed that crime, or that they can find whatever evidence they're looking for at this particular place. So it has to, generally in the law, it's what would a reasonable person interpret? But that's what the judges are looking at, but it has to be signed off by a judge. So the judge doesn't sign it, then it doesn't count. And sometimes judges won't sign it if they don't think that there is enough probable cause or facts that would warrant, or I don't want to say would warrant issuing a warrant, but yeah. Now, go ahead. No? Yeah, good.
I think I've heard of situations before, people talking before about the cops will try to get a warrant, but the judge won't sign off. But then they'll come and be like, we have a warrant, and the person doesn't know to look for the judge's signature and lets them in. We're gonna get to that.
Well, no, I'll jump there now. So,
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, I was just asking. Yeah.
Yeah, so with a warrant, right? If they present a warrant like this, or for Pennsylvania crime, let's say Commonwealth of Pennsylvania at the top, it has to be signed by a judge. So this is yeah, it has to be signed. It's circled down at the bottom, so everybody can see, right? Has to identify the individual, the location. If anything is wrong, if your name is spelled incorrectly, if the address is incorrect, we would say tell the police to get a proper warrant before you let them into your house. Definitely look for a signature, because without a signature, it's not valid. And law enforcement, they do try to, I don't want to say take shortcuts, but if you can make their job easier for them, why not? Why wouldn't they pursue that? So they try to convince people either by showing a piece of paper, or by saying you're not in trouble, or we just want to ask a question, things like that. Our recommendation is, if law enforcement is asking to come into your house, never say yes, right? Always say no, and say that you want to speak with an attorney. Yeah, always say no when law enforcement wants to come.
And to confirm, this applies to citizens and non-citizens alike. Is it-
Citizens and non-citizens. Law enforcement cannot just come into your house unless you give them permission. And lots of times people do give them permission because they are persistent and they do use tricks. Yes?
Like campus, where you like are living in a dorm, I think, is it like campus police are allowed to just go in?
So that would generally be a matter, I think, of the policies of the specific university. But campus police have a lot more authority. They're employed by the university. I think, like, if you're in student housing, probably in some of the fine print that you signed, like, would allow them to permit public safety, to enter the premises without a warrant or something like that. So that, like, you're technically probably agreeing to it. Now off campus, they should not have that authority off campus housing, but if anything is tied to the university specifically, public safety will have more leeway.
Can your landlord consent on your behalf? Like if you live in an apartment and landlord's like tells the police to go inside your apartment, is that consent?
My understanding, no. Yeah, that does not count. Unless like the landlord just, now, with anything, right, there's exceptions, but if like the landlord has right to the property at any time, then maybe. But most lease agreements, there is some type of provision as to what the landlord can or can't do. But generally, no, someone else can't just make that decision. But, we have situations where like people are renting space from a venue, right? In those situations, if ICE shows up, if you want to act one way, but the venue owner wants to act a different way, the venue owner themselves is the one who has the authority to let the police or not in. Yes.
So I think I'm thinking about like the logistics of the scenario. Police come to your house. Maybe you look through the peephole, it's police. Are you just shouting through the door, or like if you open the door, does that mean like they can come in because you open the door?
So just because you open the door does not mean that they have the right to come in. But once you open the door, it increases the chances that they're going to get in. Because at the same time, if they see anything, they see drug paraphernalia, which lots of times police see drug paraphernalia when that doesn't even exist. Right. So, and lots of times judges will be deferential to what the police officer is, saying. So the recommendation is to not open the door, speak through the door, right? Even when they bring a warrant, don't go outside to get the warrant, have them slide it underneath the door. Just have them put it, yes.
So if the warrant is signed and the information is correct, what do you do?
So you should let them in. If you don't let them in, they're going to break down your door and come in. So that's something too, I think is important to emphasize with ICE, law enforcement, or local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, whatever it is. If they're asking you permission for something, or they're asking you to agree to something, that means that they don't have the ability to do it, right? So if they had the ability to come into your house, they're probably not asking you, right? They're probably just going to come bust the door and come in. If they have a signed warrant and are able to do that, that's probably how they're going to proceed. So anytime that they are asking for your permission, they most likely don't have, or they're trying to take a shortcut to get it. That makes sense.
There's an online question that I want to just interject. Okay. So by the way, someone is saying if we can restate the questions because it's difficult to hear the questions otherwise. So the last question was around, like, if somebody should open the door, if to look for the warrant, and then you heard the answer. But there's a relevant question, I think, two questions, Adam. One is, if I don't have a lawyer and I tell them I want to talk to a lawyer, who do I call?
Okay, so, right, under the Constitution, if you're arrested for a crime, you are guaranteed a right to an attorney. So if you are arrested, tell them you want to speak to your attorney and that you need to be provided an attorney, and they will set you up with the public defender's office, and that's how you would proceed. So that's a good point now, especially with anything criminal, you're guaranteed a right to an attorney. In immigration, you're allowed to have an attorney, but the government doesn't have to provide one for you. So you have to find nonprofits that are doing it for free or, for reduced costs if you can't afford it. If you steal a candy bar and you're going to jail, you're guaranteed an attorney from the government. So there is a, separation between criminal and immigration in this context.
But in the case of somebody like, coming to the door and you're essentially, say, FBI is at your door, right? And they essentially say, we want to talk to you. And then you're essentially telling them, no, give me your card and I'll have my attorney call you. If you don't have an established relationship with an attorney, which is natural, then at that point you need to scramble, find someone, right? So like, approach us. We do these like often on behalf of community members, right? So often our lawyers will call the FBI agents and sometimes they will drop the whole thing or we'll learn more and decide whether to agree to a meeting or not and all of that. Sometimes like, the local nonprofit organizations can be a good place to refer you to folks. That's the scenario for that question. The second question quickly, which is, I think like about, you mentioned freedom of speech is not afforded to international students right now. And the question is, like, are you stating what's going on or is that settled law?
It's not settled law. I'm just, I think exaggerating of the facts that are currently happening.
All right, cool.
Yeah, so no, our perspective is that freedom of speech does apply to international students. That's not being implemented right now. And until we have court decisions, like guaranteeing that right, it is a gray area, but our belief is that we definitely are on the one side of that.
Would it be helpful to show the non-judicial, like the ICE warrants at this point? I know we're going to come to this, but just because it's relevant.
Yeah, so, right, this is a judicial warrant, a search warrant signed by a judge. This is a warrant of removal, deportation issued by ICE. It's signed by ICE, not signed by a judge. This does not give ICE, the right to enter your home without your consent. They might show this and say, oh, we have a warrant, you have to let us in, but you don't have to let them in. This is not a judicial warrant. A judge didn't sign off on it. Judge didn't review it. This is internally to ICE. ICE did their own, prosecution and made their own decision that someone is to be removed. So this does not give them the ability to break into your front door. It's our belief too that it doesn't give them the ability to break into your car. Now I know like we've seen that, right? So, right now there are some things that, should be clearly established laws that are not being implemented. And unfortunately, like we do have to get a court to come down and say that what they're doing is wrong. But yeah, so these are the two, different types of warrants. This one, don't let them in. This one, you have to let law enforcement in. Now, just want to throw it out there, ICE almost never has a judicial warrant. So you can assume ICE does not have judicial warrant. There might be an off chance that they do, but they generally do not.
But in the second document, right? So with that, ICE can still make an arrest in a public
Yes.
place.
Yes, so if ICE does have this warrant of removal, they will pursue an individual. It just doesn't give them the right to enter that individual's home to get them. They could wait outside that person's home, wait till they're on the street and then arrest them in public. They could wait till they're going to work or they're at the mall. That's not, prohibited by this. But entering someone's house, this is not giving them the right to do that.
Could I ask it? Oh, sorry. Did you have some? Yeah.
So what would someone do if one would be alone and get arrested by us?
Can you say like you're alone at home, you're alone wherever? Okay, so the question for the online audience is, what happens or what should one do if they're arrested by ICE and let's assume nobody else has witnessed this?
So-
And
So, if you are arrested, right, just always demand the right to speak with an attorney, right? So something that we're hoping that everybody prepares ahead of time is like having a relationship with an attorney. If you're an international student, if, people are concerned, have a relationship with an attorney and memorize their phone number. So when something happens, you can call the attorney. ICE, if you don't have that information, they have to let you call your attorney. They'll make things more difficult. They might look up your attorney's number. Like if you don't memorize the number, they might get it, but it might take them a couple days to get it to you or something like that. Where if you memorize it, they can't deny your right to call your attorney. So that would be the first thing, especially in a situation like that where no one knows, right? If other people are there, they can call your attorney, they can call, relatives and things like that, and you can jump into action. But with a loan, I think this really highlights the need of having a relationship with an attorney, right? And two, for CAIR-Philadelphia, like we don't do substantive immigration work, but if there's a situation where someone's arrested by ICE, they don't know who to call, but they know CAIR's number, call us and we'll connect you with the correct person. But that's, so if you're arrested alone, right, you want to contact an attorney. Our general advice too is just to never answer questions. Say, I'm choosing my right to remain silent. Do not physically resist arrest. I think that's important because, right, when ICE is doing things illegal, when law enforcement does things illegally, even if they come and search your home and they didn't have a search warrant, right? They break in, you can challenge that after the fact. You can get them in trouble after the fact. If you would, all of a sudden push the officer, then all of a sudden there's like criminal charges involved where it's like 2 or 3 years in jail that people are facing. So my recommendation is to never, engage physically with them. Now, with that said, right, we want to, relay the law and then everybody makes their own decisions as to like what works best for them. But that's generally the advice if you get caught, get arrested by yourself.
so one thing that came up in another setting is it was given the example of somebody who didn't remember or recall like an attorney number, but they remembered like, a community restaurant's number. And they called the restaurant and they said, this is my situation, like call XYZ, call anybody. And then like, eventually they were located. This is like, one scenario. Two, and I want to ask, I don't know if, and again, like you may not feel safe with your university, but some universities are saying you can call the university like safety number, whatnot, and then they will trigger, especially for international students, like, something. A third option is sometimes like calling embassies if that's an option for you, or to tell them that that's what you would like to do, and it may not be an option for some folks. And if somebody is fully undocumented, that can also trigger another level of things, right? So like, if you're fully undocumented, then is it correct? Like, essentially letting them know which embassy and like whatnot, let's assume that they don't know your nationality at that point, can essentially mean that there is someplace that they can deport you to. If they don't have that information, that essentially means more time to do more. Does it make sense? And I guess like, other question that I wanted to ask, but I think somebody was going to ask something and I don't want to hold off. But that question was whether Penn State has given clear communication to the community around like which areas of the campus they are considering private spaces versus which parts of the campus they are considering as public spaces. In some places, what we are seeing is if a building is like card access, if a building is like, where you're expected to be just like in a class and whatnot, it's not open to the public, then that's considered private space. Whereas like, quad, whatever, like, this area may be considered a public. But I don't know if the university has made that sort of communication or not. If not, and if there are trusted folks, I think it's something that can be pursued. Sorry.
Private, which is not, but they can make pretty much everywhere the campus is private.
Mhm.
Property, so that they can actually.
Yeah, I think based on the last email that they sent.
Like they specify which kind of documents, I believe like the ISSA, provided the list of documents that we need for it. And I'll be happy to share it.
So just for those online,
Now, that information, like it was buried in there, but they basically said that if their card access is required, then that's considered private. But if someone lets them into the building, then it's like.
Yeah.
Yeah, but most buildings during work hours are unlocked, even the ones that require card access, so it's like. Unless you're in a specific lab or office space that is locked at all times, then outside of that, yeah.
so for those online, I think our colleagues shared that even though technically like some areas and some departments have done more clear communication as to what's considered public versus private, but that, most places are mostly public, even though technically card access areas should be private. And I think that also then brings up the question of those, say, faculty members with offices and as such, to what extent, based on their specific circumstance, they're able to be a line of defense, are comfortable with it and all of that. But yeah, those are all different scenarios.
On that note, I think what I think is staff only areas, like sometimes you have like these kitchens or something where it says staff only, and those are considered private. So I don't know if like I as staff could like take the student into that area, for example, and close the door and say you cannot get to the student, because this is a private space, right?
That's what my department says.
And they said it was issues about these, like, taking the police, but.
Yeah. And I would assume that at that point, I think most schools would refer to bring it up to safety to the like, the schools, lawyers, and then like, whatever they may say. Let's say that it came to a face-to-face situation, there's a faculty member, a staff that's taking that care, and then there's like, ICE agents there, it may end up coming to the university solicitor's office's interpretation at that time of what they may or may not do. Is that broadly?
Yes, and I would just, I think be skeptical of how much protection could be offered by the university. I think a lot of people mean well, but, institutions right now, unfortunately, they're like having to weigh, a risk of losing all federal funding, right? Like the Trump administration is threatening that to schools that don't cooperate. So, there's a possibility that a university isn't going to want to battle with the Trump administration about, funding. So, and that's not specific to, Penn State or anything like that. It's just universities as a whole. So, I think you can plan for it, but just also know that there's a lot of discretion in how the university will act if ICE shows up to the university itself. So I'm gonna backtrack a little bit, but this is generally generally kind of what we talked about. Or actually, are there any questions right now? Off of like what we were talking about? Okay, then I'll continue. Law enforcement needs a warrant. You don't have to permit them in. Something important, you should never lie or provide false information to law enforcement. And that's something that's very important. We have the right to remain silent. You have the right to not speak with law enforcement. When they come up and they want to ask you questions, you can say, I'll talk with you with my attorney. You don't have to answer their questions. If you do answer their questions and you start lying to law enforcement, then all of a sudden that you're committing a crime. So, that's why always, if the police want to talk to you, you can talk with the police, but have an attorney present. Now, if you are in a situation where you think the police are, discriminating, asking inappropriate questions, unlawfully detaining you, you'll get the name of the officer, what department they're with, badge number, anything like that. Something else important to ask when you're interacting with law enforcement, like, am I being detained? And if they say no, then am I free to go? And go. The longer you just talk with police officers, I think the more trouble that you can get into. And they can't just stop people randomly and ask a bunch of questions to try and figure out a crime that they didn't even know existed or something like that. So if you're not being arrested or detained, leave. Yes.
What's the difference between being arrested and being detained?
I don't know the clear legal definition, so I'm not gonna make it. I didn't, like, yeah, I'm trying to. But basically, like, when you're now I guess maybe arrest is, regarding specific crime, there might be other situations where you could possibly be detained by police officers. So if police ask you for your identification, that is something that you do have to provide. If you don't provide identification to them, they theoretically could take you to the police station until they figure out who you are. But that's not considered being arrested, right? So I don't know but that highlights the difference. Yeah, but you're not free to leave, but you're not actually being arrested for a crime. And anytime you're speaking with law enforcement, you should have an attorney present, right? Whether it's just optional, where the police showed up to your house and say, hey, we want to talk to you. Could be about, something related to you. It could be something related to a different crime, a family member or something like that. If law enforcement wants to talk to you, just say, I'll talk to you with my attorney. Now,
Sorry, Adam, I can move it. Just there's two questions. One is, in terms of federal officers, the person asking is saying, I understand that's illegal, lying to federal authorities, but that it may be okay to do that with the states and local police departments. They're asking, is that correct?
So my understanding is that is not correct.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I'll defer, right? If you want to have more in-depth question about that, but my understanding is that that's not correct.
Yeah. We'll share our emails, maybe we can do a follow-up on that. And then the second question was, in Pennsylvania, is it just that, you need to provide your name and nothing beyond that is the other question. And then that's maybe something that we can.
So yes, providing your name.
Yeah, they're saying you're only required to provide your name.
As opposed to your identification.
That's my understanding from the question.
I think that is correct, because you don't need to have your ID card on you at all times. That's not a law that's required of citizens, but you do have to identify yourself if police are asking for identification.
Mhm. I'll bring this back up and then we'll bring back the questions in a little bit.
Yes,
Do you have, if you get arrested, or do you have the, or maybe detained by ICE, is it arrested or detained by ICE?
either, both,
Okay.
yeah.
Can you get access to your wallet? Can one get access to their wallet?
Like if you have it in your pocket,
Yeah,
or like,
would they confiscate all your belongings?
they'll take your belongings, but they're, like if you had, are you looking for like your attorney's number? If you're looking for,
I was trying to get around memorizing something.
yeah, if your number's in there, right, I think eventually they will let you, but how difficult they make that process, yeah, they could make it difficult. They're not gonna be helpful, at least. And now something, I don't want to scare everybody, you know, but at times when ICE arrests people, right? Getting arrested in New York, in 30 minutes, they're in New Jersey. In 45 minutes or an hour, they're on the plane to Louisiana. So the longer you aren't able to contact an attorney or an attorney's not working on that case, you could end up a couple thousand miles away. So that's why I think it's important to get it in right away. And two, it depends on where you actually are when they're filing these petitions. So in the federal court, separate from the immigration court, but they're filing, habeas petitions and challenges in the federal court. The courts that are hearing those cases, it's where the individual was at the moment it was filed. So I believe Rumesa, it's going to be in Vermont because she was in Vermont at the moment that her habeas petition was filed. She wasn't arrested in Vermont, but that's just where ICE had transported her before flying her right to Louisiana. Now, a federal court there is saying that she has to be returned back by May 1st to Vermont, because that's where she was when they filed the petition. So, if you don't have your attorney's number memorized or someone else isn't there to be able to call your attorney or call, not everybody knows each other's attorneys, right? But if they know like your best friend, your spouse, whoever your contact person is, your emergency contact, they can contact that person can get everything, get the ball rolling, right? They reach out to your attorney and can start that. But unfortunately, like it's a matter of time. So I would strongly recommend trying to memorize because it can.
Would you like to do that?
Yeah, go ahead. No, it's funny because that's like it's hard to like memorize my spouse's phone number now. Back in the day, you memorize everybody's phone number, but we don't have to do that anymore. But for your attorney, that's
Yeah.
I think it's important right now to at least try to.
And I guess to be fair to say now that like we are assessing three major risk groups, right? So first of all, like obviously, and this will come up when Adam talks about travel, but like to talk about like this, who needs to establish a relationship with an immigration attorney now, or have these conversations? People who are non-citizens, who have been active in the protest scene and who are doxxed. People who are, whether or not they're active in the protest scene, people who are non-citizens and have some sort of engagement with law enforcement courts and as such for whatever reason, right? Like those are what we are currently seeing for the most part, right? And like more might come, God forbid, but it's likely. So if you're in one of these categories, right, then it's really imperative that you're having these conversations and starting like scenario planning, right? So like I know of people like who after many years have like contacted an immigration attorney and or had like conversations like with their spouse. Hey, if something happens, this is the code word. If you don't want to rattle the kids, but that's gonna trigger essentially like things, and now they have like other emergency contacts. Or If these people are not able to avoid travel for whatever reason, and that will come up, there needs to be another preparation, right? So you're letting know someone and as such, but we'll get to that. I don't want to jump over. Yeah.
Just gonna wrap this up real quick. Do not resist arrest, even if you think it's unfair, right? If it is unlawful, you can challenge it after the fact. In the moment, don't physically try to stop a law enforcement. Say you wish to remain silent, ask for a lawyer. Right? If you can't afford an attorney, one will be provided, except for immigration, purposes. And prepare yourself, your family, in case you are arrested, right? Who to call, who to contact, who's gonna watch your children, any medication, things like that. These are not necessarily legal issues, but practical considerations that everybody should try to think about. So just briefly, your rights as a traveler. U.S. citizens cannot be denied entry back to the United States. Okay, so U.S. citizens cannot be denied entry back into the United States. They can be stopped, they can be questioned, they can be detained. They can make your life difficult, but eventually they have to let you back into the country. They can seize your electronic devices if DHS, Customs and Border Patrol, if they're asking for your cell phone. Our recommendation is to not willingly provide your password. Do not unlock your phone for them. Do not provide it. If they want to take your phone, they have legal means to do so. They can seize your phone, but they're going to ask you for permission. They're going to say, hey, can we look at your phone? Where lots of people just turn over their phone. They have nothing to hide. Our recommendation is to never do that. We don't know exactly what information they're taking off of your phone, what they're looking at, but there are situations where at one port of entry, someone has information, they deleted information. At the next port of entry, they're asking, well, why'd you delete this? What? And they're like, oh, I just, so they do pay attention to these things. So our recommendation is to never willingly give it over. But they can take it if they do take it, they have to mail it back to you. You'll probably get it within a week, get it mailed back to you. They hook it up to some program, download everything, or make a digital copy of everything on your phone. We don't know exactly everything that they see. But our recommendation is to not, right? They're going to ask you to give it over. They're going to ask you for your password. You never have to give them your password. You don't have to give them your password. Yes.
So they can take your phone,
Yes.
like by force, or by, like, unwillingly.
Yes.
How does that not require a warrant, since it's like personal property?
So you're not considered like physically present in the United States until you're inspected and entered. So the constitutional protections don't apply.
Until you're in.
Yes. Yeah. So now with this, right, U.S. citizens who stopped in Canada, we've had situations where they are, they want to take someone's phone. So no, I'm not going to. They're like, okay, you don't have to give us your phone, or we're going to seize it. You're not cooperating. We'll seize your phone, and we can't stop you from going back to America, but we can stop you from boarding this plane to go back to America. So now you have to drive 30 hours to get back home. And that's happened. And that happened under the Biden administration. So if it's happening under the Biden administration, how far would this administration push that? But yeah, so that's something that I think citizens are learning that right now. Now, luckily with citizens, they look at your social media and stuff like that right now. The impact is more for international students because they're, just blanket saying, oh, this is anti-Semitic, you're going to either deny visas, revoke visas, and things like that. Now, citizens don't have to worry about that. But if they do take your phone, right, your contacts, social media, all those things, they can go through that. So if you are traveling, we do recommend buy a cheap burner phone, or just not a burner phone, but just a phone for traveling, or, clear out your phone, things like that. Yes,
For the example of stopping you from boarding the plane, so in the Canada situation, like, it's annoying to drive 30 hours, but you can drive 30 hours. If you're like overseas or like somewhere where it's just like not possible to drive, is that still a possibility?
so I haven't seen that. But I mean, there are people, right, who are on the no-fly list, right? I would imagine, you probably could fly to Canada if you're not on the Canadian no-fly list and going that way, Mexico, things like that. But yeah, they can prevent individuals from flying. So that's problematic. Last times it's Muslim individuals, last times it has to do about your name, those raised red flags in their system. But yeah. Sorry. Yes.
My question is that, so if I would have like more than one electronic device, for example, I would have like my tablet and also like I would have my laptop, how much would I pay?
How much would they, what?
Like how much should you take off your devices?
So what kind of device?
And can you repeat the question for the audience?
Yeah, so the question was about like electronic devices that they can seize if you're traveling. How much should you wipe off of it? So generally with that question, right, each individual, depending on their risk factors, if you are a citizen, right, the risk is less than for non-citizens, right? Now you can, I think you can fly with your laptop and check luggage, or can you not do that? You can, right? So that's something which, like a laptop or something like that can be flown in your checked luggage. That can still be inspected after you land, right? But maybe there's less of a chance of them looking through your laptop. Then they know everybody has a phone on them, right, in that moment. So here, let me just, the government can take it, right? So whatever you're comfortable knowing that the government can take it and they can access that information. What they do with it, they might not do anything with it. They might use it to investigate somebody else that they're looking into. They might not even be concerned about you, but use it, to find out your contacts, things like that. So there is no just one clear answer, right? I think it's up to the individual and how much they should wipe clean. But I think our recommendation though is not to just wipe everything and to hide things, right? Like if you're a student, your laptop's going to have research papers, right? And even just normal like protest activities, right? That's not illegal. Protesting is not illegal, right? There still is freedom of speech. So we don't want to say censor that, remove all that stuff, but just know that there could be more questioning. But for a non-citizen, any information that they can see is likely going to be used against them. And they're not going to be nuanced like, oh, well, you're anti-Israel, not anti-Semitic. Like they're anything anti-Israel is anti-Semitic. And if you're at a protest, maybe even if there's a picture of somebody like walking by a protest, that's probably enough for DHS right now to say no. Yes.
So one point is like if your department allows you to have a working computer, like not personal, maybe take it. This time.
Yes.
Put it on so. It's like if the law enforcement cannot perform stops or searches based solely on race or religion, then what are the reasons for being stopped? Especially at the airport or like.
So yes. So legally, they have the right to ask about your travels and your identification. So any issues that come from your travels and your identification, like maybe your name is similar to somebody else that's, in their database. Now, like for Muslims, right? lots of times, we say this at our presentations, and they're like, well, like every Muslim I know has been stopped, like every time they fly. Yes, now, they're saying they're not just doing it based off of religion, right, but there's other things, names, which they're not saying it's religion, but those names are tied with the religion, right, so,
Yeah, this is one of those areas like that's for a while, right? So whether like the person is Muslim or Muslim perceived or what's not, based on their name, they were asking like, people, like, did you go to a madrasa? Like, people are coming from Afghanistan, Pakistan. Like, did you go to a madrasa, right? And people are like, madrasa means school. So I saw some schools, but in their mind, right? So that's coded word for whatever they imagine and attach a meaning to it. So obviously, like, it's actively happening. Yeah, yeah. There is a relevant question. I know there is a question over there, but there's a question that me just like bring now. Somebody's asking for confirmation that that your laptop, your computer can also be subject to a search at the port of entry, or it can be seized, and then they can plug whatever machines that they plug into.
yes, it's my understanding that the electronics can be seized for
Yeah.
entry. Yes,
So if one would travel and then delete apps, I mean, this is more of a technical question. I was just wondering how much they can actually see in their phone. That, but you don't give them any password, so they're not gonna download the app and see what exactly the chat with other people.
so that's what, we don't know exactly everything that they see, we don't know everything that they keep off of the phones, right? So since we don't know the full extent, like if it is seized, assume anything is taken. But that's why with these situations, like we recommend never willingly give your phone over. Right? If they want to take it, they can take it. They have to go through somewhat of a process. It's not much, but they have to, seize it as opposed to you willingly. And sometimes they don't want to go through that effort, but sometimes they do. And if you don't willingly give it to them, they might want to make your life more difficult and keep you around. Now, sometimes in situations, right, if you were saying like, no, I don't have to, or I want to speak to my attorney, things like that, people who go through life, sometimes if you're aggressive, not physically, right, not screaming at them, but if you're aggressive with standing for your rights, sometimes they'll, get bored and like move on. You're causing too much of a headache, and they might just say, okay, go. Yeah, so that's just like a practical point that I've seen people talking about, but everybody has to make the choice for themselves.
Yeah. But two resources on that, like what is really not on our phones, even when we delete apps or like remove and as such, Equality Labs and Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, they have like good guides on like what really digital security means while traveling, right? So very like detailed documents, especially Electronic Frontier Foundation. I think they have a document from a few years back, but it's still relevant, and it has like practical steps. And Equality Labs similarly has resources that we can also connect you with. By the way, we have time until 8:30, Adam. So like, let's also keep that in mind. No questions on the chat for now. I'll bring this back on. So, sorry? Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF. If I'm not saying it incorrectly, but I'll look into it. Yeah.
So
yeah, if you search, sorry, Adam, like Electronic Frontier Foundation and Border, they have digital privacy at the US border protecting the data on your devices. It's a long PDF and it has multiple parts, especially part 3 is the most relevant aspect, I think, for our discussion. Yeah.
Now, right, so we're gonna talk about non-citizens with travel and free speech. So unfortunately, as a civil rights attorney, for a civil rights organization, we don't want to tell people not to travel. We don't want to tell people to not exercise their free speech. But right now, for non-citizens, our advice is to avoid unnecessary travel. Right? Like, the laws, the rulings, anything can change. We don't have clear rulings from the courts right now as to say what is legal, what's not illegal, or what's not legal. It's too much of a gray area right now. We don't know if when someone's in the air, Trump could come out and say something, that changes everything entirely or makes things even worse than they are. And, they are preventing people from coming back into the country, looking through your cell phone. If you were at a protest, things like that. So the risk is too high. So our recommendation is to not travel. Now, if you have to travel for important reasons, right, everybody can make that choice. If you need to make that choice, right, know your rights. So attending presentations like this, looking up, resources from other organizations as well. Having multiple ways to access your immigration and travel documents. So, multiple physical copies of each, but also have an electronic copy of everything. Inform others of your travel plans and have someone monitoring. So, if you're supposed to land at 2 p.m., have a spouse, a friend, trusted person, that's paying attention when you're traveling. And, we were expecting to hear from them about an hour ago. Should I reach out? Like, someone that's aware of what's going on. So if there is, 4 hours, 5 hours, or someone's not heard from, they can jump into action. They can contact the person's attorney to see if anything's going on and try to, start fighting anything. And get in touch with an immigration attorney. So if you are going to travel, we think it's better to create that relationship, beforehand. So if anything does happen, they have all your information ready to go and you can call them. Yes.
That might be a stupid question, but like, I've never done that before. So is that, so you look up an attorney, you're like, oh, okay, this person sounds nice. And then you call them and you say, I'm, a non-citizen, I'm about to travel abroad. I'm seeking to establish a relationship with. You know what I mean? Like I'm just trying to imagine how does one do that?
Yeah, so that's a good question, right? Because it seems a little strange, but at the same time, I think immigration attorneys are understanding that a lot of people are concerned right now and that people are trying to make these connections. Now, we do have, a list of attorneys that we partner with, but that our community members have used and said like they were, good immigration attorneys. So we send those lists out to people when they are asking, who to contact or things like that. Yes, I think calling and saying, I'm, an international student and I want to, schedule a consultation, with the attorney, to discuss either, upcoming travel, like for this context, upcoming travel, but even if it's not, like, if someone got a parking ticket 3 years ago, right? People are having their visas revoked over those types of things right now. So having that conversation with an attorney before someone's visa is revoked or their CVIS is canceled, right? Like their CVIS registration is canceled. Having that conversation beforehand can get the ball rolling. Now, if that's something, like if you need assistance or anybody needs assistance with that, you can contact us and we can reach out to the attorney, try to set up a consultation, things like that. You can, facilitate that awkwardness of like, hey, I need an attorney, but because usually you're arrested for something where you want to do something, like you want to sue somebody. This is, I don't know, do I need an attorney?
Preventive, maybe kind of.
But I think it's worth taking as much. Things are stacked against international students right now. Things are stacked, heavily in favor of ICE. So anything that we can do ahead of time to kind of push back on that is not all we can do, but I think it's important that, we try to do it.
But to give a concrete idea, right? So what that looks like is you are reaching out to schedule a consultation. Usually there is a fee for that, right? it can be $100, $200 based on the attorney. We have some resources to help on that front as well. And then, like, you're discussing, this is my situation, this is my situation. The attorney might say, until nothing happens, we don't need to do anything. The attorney might say, we need to do X, Y, Z right away. And then they will probably say, that means we are going to charge this much for that step, right? So, like, that's what it looks like. Again, somebody might be on a green card for many years, but never took the step towards citizenship. And they're discussing this with the attorney in the consultation, and the attorney says, okay, we can do it tomorrow, and I'm gonna charge $3,000, I don't know, whatever, right? Then, like, it's your decision whether you're able to move forward with that or not. Are there need for more resources? Then it can become like that additional level of conversation.
Green card holders, from citizens of the countries that are speculated to be on a new, Trump ban. Recommendation is shouldn't leave, right? It shouldn't apply. Our belief is that, they can't just, prevent green card holders from returning, but they've done that in the past. They're doing that now. They're trying to revoke green cards. So it's better to be safe than sorry. Now with that, right, like a parent is sick or things like that, right? Each individual has to, make the choice that, works best with them and their circumstances. So some people are able to take that risk because, there is a chance you fly home, fly wherever, come back and nothing happens, right? There's been times we're monitoring airplanes coming in. Oh, it landed. Oh, hopefully nothing happens. And, people we don't hear from, they say, oh, everything's good. We're out, got our luggage, we're good. You're like, okay, didn't have to do anything, but you still like paying attention, trying to prepare. So that's more likely that nothing's gonna happen, but the off chance that something does happen, right? It's the result is like drastic and it's being either removed or not allowed back into the country. So we don't think that's necessarily worth the risk. Non-citizen visa holders may be denied entry for refusing to cooperate or answer questions. So a US citizen returning, if they start asking, they see on your phone pictures or something like that of you at a protest, and they start asking you questions about the protest, you don't have to answer if you're a US citizen. If you're not a US citizen and you're a visa holder, if you don't answer their questions, they can refuse to let you. So non-citizens don't have the right to refuse answering those questions. And since they don't have that right, maybe it's not worth taking the trip right now. Now, lastly, and probably most unfortunately, is that non-citizens, should not be taking part in activism or political dissent right now. That's unfortunately, the reality of the situation that we're in. Citizens are facing. So for the past, year and a half, 18 months, we've seen how it's impacted, protesting, how it's impacted people's livelihoods, jobs, things like that. With that said, citizens, have a lesser risk than non-citizens with this. So right now, citizens, if they go to a protest, they're not going to be, sent to jail for protesting. They can't have their citizenship revoked for protesting. For non-citizens, ICE is arresting people for going to protest. So they are revoking visas, they are revoking green cards. So, now is not the time for non-citizens to be politically active. You can do stuff behind the scenes, but yeah, we think being out there having your name tied with it is not a good idea right now. Yes.
This is very difficult, for us to say also, but we are also seeing that this is a moment where some folks are stepping forward a bit more, others, based on risk assessments, are taking a step back just out of concern. But sorry, was there a question? Maybe.
Yeah, so I mean, I know the activism part is kind of like geared towards more like against Palestine and and kind of like the current administration. Well, just curious, we are here at Penn State, we're in the middle of a union campaign for graduate workers. how does that factor into this?
Oh, that's a great question. Sorry, and no, because, right, this hurts, like, we don't want to tell anybody to not, participate in any, First Amendment protected activity. I think there's less of a risk, on the union aspect of things than going to, pro-Palestine protest. But also just with that, like, if your name's associated, just know that it could possibly increase the risk that it's not just the government, unfortunately, that's looking through people's social media, right? Canary Mission, the general public, people are looking at who's been at protests. They're going through like, oh, I know this person, oh, we know this student, and they're sending lists of people who were at protests, to the government to make their job easy for them. So I don't want to say don't do it. Just know doing it could possibly increase risk. And this is something that, why it's very important to challenge and fight what's going on right now, because right now it does seem to be tied right to the pro-Palestine movement, but we've been seeing things where all of a sudden they might want to be doing stuff with environmental issues and things like that. And all of a sudden, if they can do it for pro-Palestine, they can do it for any issue. So that's why it's important to fight back now, so that, it should never be a question in your mind whether like you participate in union protests and things like that. But unfortunately, right now, I think that question is coming up.
So to that fact, I mean, currently, right? So like in the nonprofit broader like movement space, like the first executive order is being expected around organizations doing environmental work, immigration work, like, and then probably like, Muslim works and what's not. So it's a difficult time to be doing this. And I think there was that Columbia student, right? So who like, who was kicked out of Columbia, who was also the union rep, if I'm not mistaken.
He's the president.
Yeah. So like if this trend continues, right? So like, it looks like this administration will likely start coming after like, many folks. And if it's like a more progressive union sort of cause, then it will likely become a bit more like,
That was a good question. Yes.
I know about someone's research that focus environmental justice. And then propose those themes.
Yeah. Yeah. So the question from the room is, there may be folks like whose research is on environmental issues, whose research is on Palestine, or who might be, say, anthropologists like who have data. So again, like before passing to you, like because we're discussing in another setting with some academic friends, right? So anthropologists and their departments, right? So are saying, we'll get you a computer, don't carry any of the data. Like, we don't know what will happen, because if that computer is confiscated, then, right, so like, your confidential information can be there. I think like, that if you are especially in a supportive department, that's probably something that you should have a conversation with the chair. Most departments, like including like, the center that I am affiliated with on the academic side, has funds for this stuff and can potentially get that. I mean, if your research and your publication and as such is tied, right? So like there may be another level as well. I mean, just in terms of academic conferences, we are seeing the impact, right? So like, more of like, I am going to a conference tomorrow that we are organizing, that we intentionally made both virtual and in person for those who might be at risk. And I think there's like an element of understanding on that. So that's a tricky situation, yeah.
And just generally too, right? Like if there are those concerns, I recommend for people to reach out to us, because that could be a conversation that we have like offline, and just something that maybe we monitor going forward, right? Try to pay attention to, because there should be academic freedom too with things, right? And having a case to pursue that, to have a court say like, no, the government can't do this, would be beneficial. So if a case can come up, that's something that we would want to jump on, but other organizations, like I'm sure like the ACLU and things like that, are very concerned about, academic freedom.
Sorry, I need to send a link to somebody who was asking in the chat.
Non-citizen law about domestic travel.
So we are not seeing that right now. We're not seeing that be an issue.
What was the question?
Should non-citizens be worried about domestic travel? That's something that we're not currently seeing. Could it become an issue? It could potentially become an issue. I think it's less. Yeah, I don't want to hypothesize, but it's not currently an issue that we are seeing, but it could potentially become an issue. If it does, then we would definitely issue guidance, for the community, but that's not something right now. Anybody have any questions right now?
I'll,
Here.
sorry.
Quickly go over for citizens. Similar to non-citizens, just, we're not saying don't travel for citizens, but citizens should take precautions, right? Informing others of your travel plans, having your travel documents and identification, physical copies, electronic copies, things like that. The US Constitution only protects you while you are physically inside the United States. So when you're traveling, you don't have the same rights. Right, if the police showed up to your house and demanded you give them your cell phone, it's like you laugh at them, shut the door, move on. At the airport, that's not how it works out. So when you're, as a US citizen, you're only required to provide identification and to answer any questions about your travel. Other than that, you're not required to answer the questions. But with that said, if you're not answering their questions, be prepared for secondary screening, be prepared for them to make life more difficult for several hours. They will eventually have to release you, but they could try to make things difficult for several hours. We've had situations where people have been held for 8, 9, 10 hours. Usually it's closer to 3, 4 hours. But after 15 hours of traveling, that's not a situation you want to be in. But that's what you only have to identify yourself, provide identification, and answer questions about where you travel to. They are asking people, citizens, for their social media handles, saying, "Oh, you have to fill out this form before you come in." As a citizen, say no. You don't have to provide that. Now, for non-citizens, if they're asking that, you may have to provide that information. We kind of talked about this earlier and throughout, but US citizens cannot be detained or denied entry, for refusing to produce passwords, for refusing to provide device access, for refusing to submit electronic devices for a search, for refusing to answer questions unrelated to establishing a person's citizenship or identity for travel, but doing this, may cause delay. Customs and Border Patrol has the authority to take devices for inspection. Laptops, cell phones, tablets, and other devices, you're not required to unlock the device for them. But again, if you don't unlock the device for them, expect to be held. And to have the device seized. And then with precautions, delete social media, log out of different things, burn your phone. I think having a phone for travel could be the safest thing. But just generally, ICE. Sorry, gonna segue now into I want to try to get just through this. We're pretty much done, and we talked about a lot of this, but ICE doesn't play fair, generally, so they'll use unmarked cars. They try to collect data on individuals. They'll come very early in the morning, 5 a.m., come banging on somebody's door, that catches people off guard. Something we're seeing with a lot of the Muslim students is that we're either being arrested, before or after going to iftar dinners, right? So they're knowing when people are leaving. They will pretend to be, or they can pretend to be law enforcement. I'm sorry. They might say, oh, we're the FBI, when they're actually not the FBI. Our understanding, right, is that ICE should be legally required to identify themselves, and when you ask them, they should, but everything that we're seeing is that that's not what they're doing right now. People are demanding identification, and they're not saying anything, so people, they're being what looks like essentially being kidnapped on the side of the street, by individuals with jeans and a hoodie, right? And I think, there is an element of that. They're trying to do this on purpose to scare people, right? When we see those images, people are scared. And I think, that's why we're here today, right? Because of things like this that are happening now, that people are a lot more scared than they used to be. They'll conduct collateral arrests. If they want to arrest you, they might arrest your spouse in order to get to you, right? So they do things like that. So just know that with ICE, they don't play fair. You're right. If ICE shows up, they have the right to remain silent. Don't answer questions about your immigration status. Speak to a lawyer. Definitely don't sign anything unless a lawyer reviewed it with you. They will say, oh, sign this and you'll be able to just leave. We just need you to sign this paper. And then you're, like self-removing yourself, or, they don't explain that. But if you had an attorney, reading that with you, you'd be able to, push back. Ask for an interpreter. You need an interpreter. If you don't understand what ICE is asking, request a phone call either for your attorney. You can also contact the consulate if that's advantageous in the situation, and deny access to your home, car without a judicial warrant. Now, with this said, right, we are seeing videos of them smashing people's windows, car windows in. We are seeing them just arrest people on the side of the road, but these are your rights. Now, we're going to challenge, these are going to keep being challenged in the courts. I mean, right now, unfortunately, we don't have the answers from the court system, right? Everything's currently ongoing. And this gray area is, I think, the most problematic time, because we don't know what the courts are going to say the law is. If a couple months down the road, the courts say everything the Trump administration is doing is legal, we'll at least know then this is the rules, this is how we have to adapt, this is how we can challenge it. Right now, there's a lot of open-ended questions, a lot of questions that are left unanswered. So we try to make the legal arguments, to push our perspective, but once the courts rule, then we'll actually be able to have more concrete information for people. ICE, they need a judicial warrant or consent to enter your home. Without either, you don't have to give them access. And again, ICE almost never has a judicial warrant. We went over these warrants. Something just generally to consider is that schools, houses of worship, hospitals, religious ceremonies, parades, rallies, things like that, that before there was a policy memo that ICE wouldn't engage in immigration activities at these locations. When Trump came to office this time, he rescinded that policy memo, seemingly opening the door for ICE to make arrests at these locations. With that, public spaces, it's likely that ICE can enter. Private spaces, ICE needs a warrant to get into private spaces behind locked doors. If you're at, behind locked doors and things like that, at a mosque. With the decision of this policy, seemingly ICE could possibly come into the prayer area, right? That's open to the general public. If it's open all day long, anybody can come off the street and pray when they want to, then ICE can probably enter that space. Now, if there's any rooms that are locked or the door is routinely locked only members of the congregation are allowed in, things like that, then it would be a private space. So within there, say the imam's office, or say there's a separate section for a school or something like that in a mosque, anything that's closed or locked, put up signage that says private space. ICE would need a warrant to get, to those locations. ICE can't search locked cabinets or electronic devices unless they have permission or a judicial warrant. So never give permission, and they're most likely not going to have a judicial warrant. And then this is just generally a case study of Mahmoud Khalil, but I definitely want to open up for questions that people have. All the questions tonight, I think, have been good so far. So definitely thank you everybody for participating and being engaged. But I can open it up. I can talk about this for a couple of minutes, but I feel like we kind of are interchanging this throughout. But this bottom part is tough in that, the Secretary of State that says if there's reasonable ground to believe that their presence or activities in the United States would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States, they can revoke their green card. Yes.
So when I travel, I entered the US through either Washington or Chicago. And do I need a lawyer that resides there to?
No, that's a good question. For immigration purposes, immigration attorneys can practice in all 50 states. Now, if you're arrested in Pennsylvania for a Pennsylvania crime, you would need an attorney who's barred in Pennsylvania. But for immigration purposes, that's not. So any immigration attorney will be able to represent you whatever port of entry. That's a good question.
But that it may take time for them to get the specific area if they need to be physically present, right?
Possibly, but also at the same time, different. If you went with like a big law firm, right? Some law firms have offices in a ton of, cities. Now with that though, you can consider it, but I do think if you have any attorney, like these are the considerations that they'll take into account when they're like advising you, and that if it is something that they need to be in Chicago for some reason, they might be able to make a connection with an attorney beforehand that they can have someone like go in their place or things like that. Yes.
Another person who is like a non-citizen entering the US in terms of like phone security and like.
My recommendation is yes. To proceed how non-citizen, like our guidance for non-citizens. Know that their social media can be searched. So I think generally at this time, not having any social media on your phone would probably be better. They still may demand of providing like a Facebook account, or they may demand their handle. For non-citizens, they would have to provide that information. But I think taking in those precautions, having other people know when they're traveling, and I mean, it's something too that someone can reach out to us, right? Like I said earlier, right? Which sometimes we're monitoring planes coming or landing and nothing happens, but we're aware of it in case something does happen. So.
I guess that was kind of answered, but is there, I know like with student visas, you have like a certain amount of time that you're allowed to stay in the country. Should she just not leave until she has to?
So that I would defer to contact us like directly, or to contact an immigration attorney to talk that out.
There's a question online. Can I convey that? The question is about, imagine there is a faculty member they have a private office, and they are essentially providing safety to a person who is being actively pursued by ICE, and then ICE is at their door and is demanding to have access to the person. What would the ramifications be, or what are the considerations that this person who's providing this safety needs to think about?
That's a good question. I think the big thing that, if a faculty member is making that choice, right, to have their area designated as a private space and are taking measures, they theoretically could lose their employment, right? That's something that could happen. Because in these situations, ultimately, the university is going to have say, they're the ones who are going to give permission or not to enter that office. I think a professor can put up a fight for so long, but then theoretically, right, the university could just say, okay, well, then you're not employed here anymore. You don't have a right to be in there. So they can just let them. I think that's a risk.
If they are tenured, though, it would be more difficult, right?
Yeah, it would be more difficult, but we've seen tenured professors fired for free speech, correct?
Yeah.
Specific to this cause. So, I think it is a way to put up a fight, and it can delay things, but just know that ultimately it would depend on how the university is responding. If the university supports the professor, then it could, be beneficial, but if they want to cooperate with ICE, then
Could they face any harboring kind of?
theoretically, yes. I think it's very fact specific with that, but theoretically, yes.
And just on this, because there are different networks who are thinking about like this question, right? So what does safety mean at this moment? That it's our understanding that somebody's visa being revoked doesn't sort of automatically mean that they are being actively pursued by ICE or that they are informed at that point, right? So the harboring and as such kind of risks come in if it's actively known that a law enforcement agency is looking for a specific individual at that point. Because say like, somebody's visa is revoked for whatever reason, and then they are staying with some friends, not at their regular address, which is our advice, to think through their options. But if there's no indication that any law enforcement agency is actively looking for them, at that point, it's our understanding that that risk isn't existing for the people who are opening their space to those folks.
Thank you.
So you mentioned that if you get arrested by ICE or like law enforcement, you will have a call shot for according to our attorney, right? Is this just one shot thing, or like let's say they arrest me at 5 a.m. and my attorney is sleeping? What then?
No, you'll have another opportunity. It might not be exactly when you want it, but they have an obligation to allow you to make the phone call. And in prison, you can make phone calls too, even to like family members and things like that. Now, something to consider, like if you are arrested, any phone calls that you have with your attorneys, the police, they can't listen to. They can listen, and they will listen to any phone calls you have with your friends, your family, things like that, they can listen to. Your phone calls with your attorneys, they can't listen to. Yes.
So like the situation that you said earlier, maybe you like call a family member who has the contact for the attorney, or if your family member is an attorney and they're gonna contact other attorneys that can help you more specific to the issue. Which of those conversations is confidential? Is it only when you have like, how do they know who's your attorney when you're calling someone? That was a lot of questions in one.
So, there's ways to see like an attorney-client, relationship. One could be like an actual agreement. If the person's on retainer, if they were working on your, like, immigration paperwork, you know, if they submitted that stuff, that would give them authorization. But usually, the attorneys just have to submit a form typically, especially with ICE. And lots of times there is deference, you know, there's some situations, I'll be honest, like, a couple attorneys called ICE because, you know, a community member didn't really know what to do and they were calling every attorney that they know. And ICE is like, well, just giving you a heads up, like, 2 other attorneys called me, got the same case. It's like, okay, well. Right, then we have to go make calls to our clients and try and get to the bottom of, well, who's gonna take what and things like that, but. The circumstances, the facts, police should. Cause this is a constant, or so with ICE, right, but you still have a right to your own attorney, right? The government doesn't have to provide it. But because you do have a right to an attorney. You know, I think law enforcement, they don't play so much in this area. They can make it a little bit more difficult, as things like that, but. You know, they generally, like when I call, most of the time I can talk to someone. Depending on how much information they can give me right away, they
Right.
might need additional proof that, you know, I am the attorney or something like that, but usually there's some deference given.
So then, would it be, wise to sort of not discuss details until you can confirm that they know that you're talking to your attorney, so that there's no chance of any kind of self-incrimination over the phone or anything like that?
Yeah, so like make it clear when you're speaking with your attorney, right? But like your conversation to a friend to contact your attorney, right? That's not.
Yeah.
That's not
They
confidential.
wanted to get my attorney.
Yeah, that's not confidential and they can. But if you are talking to your attorney, you say this is your attorney, they can't.
And sometimes even attorneys might just like, I think there might even be like, you know, separate connection points for those attorney calls, like, because like when community members that we are otherwise assisting call me, right? I'm not the attorney. Then like, you know, the recording whatnot, because these are like industrial systems, right? So like it says like it can be listened and like recorded and whatnot. And then maybe even just like when you're talking, like it can be something to confirm with the person that you're talking with. Hey, is this the confidential one? Like, can we talk? And sometimes attorneys say, so, yeah.
Yeah.
So this might have been answered already, but what should one do or what students on J1 visa do when their visa is revoked?
So I contact an attorney immediately. I think that's the big thing. Right now, right, there's a temporary restraining order that 133 students, I think. The temporary restraining order is that they're to reinstate their visas until there's going to be more into this case, but they filed stuff immediately, and you know the judge just granted that. I think this was yesterday or like 2 days ago. Yeah, so it's new, but this also is giving us a chance to fight back where we didn't have this a couple of days ago, right? But now 133 students, and I do think it's applicable to beyond them, but it's not general to all students right now. But so if that comes up, you know, contact us like right away. If you notice, if you get notification from your university or UC, you know, that it canceled or something like that, contact us right away, because there may be legal protections that we can put that will temporarily at least not allow the government to remove somebody, you know, until they go through the full court system. But so there is a little bit of hope right now that at least we can do something. And theoretically that a judge here can make the same ruling and issue a temporary restraining order. So yeah, definitely give us a call.
Yeah. I know we need to wrap up, but I want to mention, because it's mentioned on the screen, doxing. If anybody here has concerns around like they are being doxed and as such, and even though it may not be possible to remove an entry for you on some of these wild websites, there are other steps that can be taken, and we have a relationship with Equality Labs, and there can be one-on-one support for you, right? Like someone's Wikipedia entry can include like incorrect and like, problematic information beyond their control. And like, we are able to connect 101 on that. And like, there is also other tools like Delete Me that we can cover for you through that relationship. So that's something else that's, that we encourage people to reach out to us if they have that experience, so that we can share some of those resources with you, including like more 101 case specific help as well. Okay. Passing back to you. All right.
We want to start off by saying thank you all so much. That was a really, really like helpful and wonderful presentation. And I think I also just want to like give a shout out to CAIR, because we've been working with Ahmed and Adam for a while now, and they've been helpful every step of the way. So like the support goes beyond this one workshop. Just want to give them another round of applause.
Sorry, somebody on the chat, thank you for asking because we forgot to bring this up. But how to get in touch with us, right? So ta.cair.com/report is where you can file something, and we encourage that because it helps us keep data informed over there. Our emails are there for both of us, and like many of you have our numbers and Signal, and as such, we're always happy.
Thank you. And I also want to give a shout out / thank you to Abajava for allowing us to be in this space. So thank you so much for that. I won't take long. I think what I'll just say is, what I said at the beginning, which is that this is a moment in which we are witnessing the consequences of how powerful the Palestine movement is. And I think it's a testament that like if our movement wasn't powerful, they wouldn't be trying so hard to stop us, right? And I think this is something for all of us who have been part of the movement to really be proud of. And to continue to keep in mind as we keep organizing for the liberation of our people. And so Students for Justice in Palestine will be closing out the semester with a few events. On Friday at 6:30, we will be having a BDS workshop. So it's a boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement workshop, which goes over what is BDS and how can you as a person contribute to the cause for Palestine, both as an individual and through targeting companies and other sources. And then on Tuesday of next week, we will be having our last general body meeting of the semester. And so we hope to see you all at both of those events, and thank you so much for coming again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting us. Thank you everyone online. Take care.
Confidential, like if we send something to you.
If you send it.
Usually if we use our own personal email.